Hey everybody, Craig here from VCA's Southern California Hospital Management Team, and today we have a presentation for you on managing staff costs in a fluctuating business environment. Specifically, I'm going to talk to you about some of my perspectives and techniques for monitoring, evaluating, and adjusting staff labor in a very active and moving business dynamic. So if you like the sound of that, please stay connected to our forum. We plan to bring you many videos like this on management and leadership topics here in VCA Animal Hospitals, and we'd really like to have your participation, and we hope we bring you some real value. So without any further ado, why don't we jump right into it? All right, so before we dive into the discussion of staff labor, let's spend a few minutes just talking about what it means to be a manager at a VCA animal hospital. And if you've been in a leadership position for more than a day, you probably already realize that it's crazy. There are tons of things coming down the pipeline to you all the time, and your list of responsibilities is pretty big. You are definitely responsible for the financial health of the hospital. You oversee all the operational activity. You've got tons of administrative and task work. You're managing your team. You're interfacing with the National Support Office, which means you're talking to payroll, human resources, marketing for sure. You're launching new initiatives and managing programs, and all of it can be pretty overwhelming. And sometimes it feels difficult to figure out what your priorities are and just keep on top of all of it. So pro tip, every Monday morning I start my day out by just taking a moment, having a coffee, and listing out everything that I know is a priority for me this week so I can make sure that I'm anchored to some of the decisions that I know I want to either figure out or projects I want to get done. So that's one little tip. When you think about what some of those priorities should be, they're going to move around on you all the time. And so one thing that I think is important for me is I keep my head on a swivel. I am constantly looking around my environment, just trying to keep an eye on what's happening and what might be changing so that I can be prepared to adjust as quickly as possible. Waiting too long to see something come or have something sneak up on you, both those things will happen to you as a manager in your career, and the key is to just get on them quickly and try to adjust appropriately. So today we're going to look at that specifically in the context of labor. Sometimes things will move around on us and we find ourselves in a position where our labor has gone from a very comfortable ratio of labor cost to business, and suddenly that shifts. And so we need to ask ourselves, how are we going to adjust for this, and what changes do we need to make? And so my hope is that today, through some of my techniques that I use, you may gain some benefit here in at least doing some analysis so you can make an informed decision. So here's why we care. From a fiscal management point of view, inventory and labor are definitely the two biggest accounts that are going to influence your overall financial performance and success. And if you don't manage them, if you take your eye off the ball of either one of them for the shortest amount of time, they can so quickly just destroy all the value that you've already created for the practice in the shortest amount of time. And rebuilding that and repairing that can sometimes be unsuccessful. Sometimes you can't actually recover from it. And when you can, sometimes it takes a while to build it back. It's really frustrating. And so these two accounts, because they are so weighty, because their magnitude and their power is so strong, we have to watch them very closely. So as I mentioned, we'll deal with inventory another time, but labor we're going to talk about today. So think about it as if you owned 5 dogs, right? And 3 of them are Chihuahuas and 2 of them are Labradors. And they've all got to eat. And let's just imagine that you feed them all from one communal bowl of kibble. And you can imagine how that's going to go. You've got all the kibble poured into the bowl, and you've got the 3 Chihuahuas over here, and you've got the 2 Labradors over here. And the 2 Labradors, being Labradors, they just kind of lumber in, slop it all down, and in 2 seconds you look and all the kibble is gone. So what's going to happen? Well, apart from having 3 angry Chihuahuas now hunting you down, sizing you up more sincerely, there's going to be some problems from that, right? You can imagine that the 2 Labradors, if they keep that up, they're going to get bloated, they're going to gain weight, they're going to develop health problems related to that. And as a group of 2 big giant Labradors, they're just going to have a lot of problems. And the Chihuahuas, they're going to get hungry, they're going to get skinny, and one of them might die. So in the same way, labor and inventory are like the two big Labradors, and all the other things that we need to feed from our business kibble through our hospital are relying on that kibble as well. And so it's our duty to make sure that the Labradors don't roll in and take everything and leave nothing for the rest of the hospital operations. And so we're going to think about it in that context today as we kind of move through a couple scenarios. All right, so when we are talking about managing a cost, it's usually because something's changed in the business. And so we have to figure out how we're going to measure the business so we can talk about that in a consistent way, you and I here. So a lot of people will define business a lot of different ways. In veterinary medicine, we tend to think about it and talk about it often in the context of patient visits. And so specifically, when we want to measure it, we're going to look at patient visit data, like how many patients are coming through the door, daily, weekly, monthly, annually. And so you'll find those on your profit and loss statements. Down at the bottom, you'll see order count. And so that's order count, orders, visits, foot traffic. It's all the same thing, but it's really talking about how many people are coming through your front door for services from you. The second piece that we'll look at is the average transaction. So how much are they spending on average on their invoice? And so that can range greatly. If you're doing some analysis and you're looking at just boarding, well, boarding transactions are one price, as are grooming. If you're looking at just professional revenue that comes from the doctor services, well, that's going to be a much higher number. And if your hospital has all of those services, when they all get mushed together, your average transaction number is going to be a little bit lower than maybe when you compare it to a hospital that has only professional revenue and doesn't have these non-DVM related services. So, for example, when we're thinking about it, we would say that business is, if you want a formula, business is orders times average transaction. So let's imagine we had 20 patients come through the door and each of them spent $250. So then our business would be $5,000. And if that changed, if the amount of people coming through the door suddenly dropped to 10 and they still spent $250, now we have a $2,500 business. So our business has been cut in half. Or you can reverse that scenario and you could say the 20 people still come in, but now they're only spending $200 and our business has dropped to $4,000. And so I'm doing some math for you there. So those things can move around quite a bit, but those are the two major dimensions that we look at in order to determine what is happening with our business. And so we want to think about those and monitor those. And when those are on the move, the very first question we should be asking ourselves is why, as leadership. And those can be difficult things to change. And that, again, is also another topic. So that's why you're going to hit that subscribe button, because we're going to talk to you about how to build revenue on both sides of that equation. All right, so let's imagine some scenarios here. So let's say you wake up one morning, you check your phone, you look at your email, and you find out that your number one producing veterinarian has fallen in love and they're going to be moving in 2 weeks and they're giving you their notice. Or maybe there's an aggressive new competitor that's opened up near you and they're doing a great job and you're seeing clients vacating your business in a pretty quick manner. Or let's say there's a natural disaster, a wildfire, a flood, or a pandemic, and now everything you're used to doing is changing and every business dynamic you can think of is changing, including your staff labor. Well, we're going to have to make some adjustments. All right, so sticking with our business kibble analogy here, let's imagine that every week we pour $50,000 of business kibble, aka revenue, into the bowl to feed our 5 hungry dogs. And of those dogs, we've got 2 big ones. One's named inventory and the other's named labor. We haven't named the chihuahuas yet, but we will. And let's say labor rolls through and eats that $10,000 worth of labor out of our business kibble. And so 10,000 of 50,000, that's a 20% labor digestion, you might say. And so then let's imagine now that the scenario has changed, and instead of having the $50,000 of kibble, we've only got $30,000. But labor comes through and consumes that same $10,000 worth of kibble. Well, now at that point, the cost of labor's digestion is going to go up to 33%. And that's a bad scenario. And so what's going to happen is, well, first and foremost, our three chihuahuas are going to roll up and like, WTF, man, what are we going to do? And what we're probably gonna have to get rid of a chihuahua. Like, it's gonna be a bad situation. So we need to figure out how to adjust that as quickly as we can, so that as our size of bowl gets smaller, as our kibble gets smaller, we are thoughtfully moving our labor costs down in coordination with that. And that's the healthiest thing that we can do. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, stop. I can already hear it coming at me right now. So first of all, we're not getting rid of any chihuahuas. We love our chihuahuas. We're going to figure this out. But there's an important question that I think people would debate right here. And I am not suggesting that this shouldn't happen. I'm just focused on labor for the moment. But as leadership people in the hospital, there's an activity that you must do at this point in time, which is you need to stop and you need to think. Why is the kibble supply been interrupted? What is actually happening, and is there anything that we can do about it? Do we have reputation problems? Do we have problems with our hours of operation? Do we need to change our weekend hours? Do we need to change our appointment times? Are our prices too high or too low? Do we not offer enough services? Are our spays and neuters priced out of the market so we're not doing them anymore? Are we recruiting appropriately? And then whatever that question is, you need to get the irons for that answer into the fire at the same time that you're dealing with adjusting for labor. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We're managers. We can do anything. So usually. Just before the fall, right? But sincerely, we need to have this conversation with ourselves. We need to be honest. We need to talk to each other, and we need to understand if our business dynamics are moving, is it because of something that's in our control? If it's not, then we need to respond in the most healthy way that we can. If it is something that we can control, well, then we better get on it and put your egos aside. If you were asleep at the wheel for some various reason and something snuck by you and now you're in trouble, we'll just get on it and start solving it. But don't bury your head in the sand. But definitely this is the point in time when you notice your business dimension has changed, that if you didn't see it coming, you need to take a minute and make sure you know why it's happening to you, and then think about what you can do to solve it. All right, deep breath here. So it should come as no surprise if you've looked at the recording date of this video that it is the first couple weeks of April in 2020, and that means that we are right in the middle of the COVID-19 global pandemic that is landing right on top of the United States. And for the last several weeks, hospitals in our network have been struggling greatly. Management has been working very hard to figure out how to balance keeping staff as fully employed as possible, because we know that if we cut hours, that means they're going to struggle to pay bills, pay rent, pay mortgage. But at the same time, we have a financial responsibility to try and keep the business as healthy as possible, and we can't keep that process on indefinitely. So now we need to think about how we will look at a revenue line that is just falling off a cliff and figure out how to evaluate that trajectory a little bit and make adjustments for what we can actually afford. And so that's what we're going to look at. And I prepare this presentation with the greatest respect for my team. I manage multiple hospitals and I love and care for my team greatly. And so I put this video together because I know other managers are struggling with this topic as well. And I just want to try to provide some tools and some thoughts to help people do this in a healthy way. So for all you home gamers playing along here, I just use an Excel document and some pretty basic math equations. There's nothing fancy going on here. There are no logarithmic functions. There's no cryptocurrency being studied. We're just doing some basic multiplication and division. In fact, all of the data I'm pulling from eSpot, so you can get all of that as well for your own hospital. And I've chosen a hospital that I know is undergoing some pretty significant declines that are persistent in revenue. When I look at this kind of information, I try not to make decisions off of one singular data point. So for labor analysis, I'll always go back 6 weeks for this type of analysis, just so I can get a better feel for the trajectory of the change. And using the eSpot Daily, all I've done here is just lay out the weekly revenue. And then because I know that they are changing how many days open per week I just divided their weekly revenue by however many days they were open that week. And that gave me a nice average daily revenue to work with. And so that's step number one. And then step number two is we want to figure out what our average wage cost is. And so you can also get that from the payroll trend in eSpot. And you'll see that kind of near the middle section of that report. And so for this hospital, that report will give you 6 weeks back also conveniently of average wages. So I looked at all of them, and the general number that I thought was reasonable here was $16.50 an hour for their staff. And so step three is we want to load in our labor goal as a percentage. And so you can look at, or I look at, two things here to figure out, like, where am I trying to go? What percentage labor is healthy for this location? And so that might involve me looking at their prior year data or my prior year data to see what my percentage of revenue labor had been. You have to take your budget into account, and you also have to think about whether you've been running clean labor or kind of dirty labor. And so what's the right number might be a little bit of a moving target. And in this case, for this hospital, 25% was a good labor goal that they had consistently been living by, as close to their budget and close to their prior year numbers. And so I've loaded that in as well. So now I've got their average daily revenue, I've got their average staff wage, and I know what I want their percentage of labor to be in relationship to revenue, no matter where it is, growing, shrinking, staying the same. And for them, that's 25%. Step four, we're going to determine how much daily labor we have to spend. And so, again, pretty simple math here. All I'm doing is taking the average daily revenue and I'm multiplying it by that target percentage rate. And that's giving me a dollar amount each day that would be the equivalent 25% of their revenue. And so you can see, just looking here, what's happening to them. In week one, they had $1,400 to spend, a little more than that each day. And by week 6, if we were adjusting our labor budget to the declining revenue, they'd be down to about less than $1,000 a day that they could spend on labor. So this is tough stuff. So then we're moving on to step 5, and that is calculating how many hours we can afford each day. And so all we need to do here is we have our target labor. We know how much labor money we have to spend each day. If we divide that number by the average wage, that's going to tell us how many hours are available to us. So looking at week 1 for this location, with their $1,478 of labor money at a $16.50 average wage, they would have about 90 hours that they could provide to their staff. If we drop down to week 6, that has gone down to 57 hours. And so then moving on to step 6, we're going to convert that to shifts. And so here for this location, they used to be doing alternative work weeks. And so they were on 10 hours a day. So you have to think about what your shifts are. I'm just going to assume everyone's on an 8-hour shift. And if that's the case, then 90 hours of labor would translate to about 11 shifts. And by the time they made it to week 6, then they're looking at 7 shifts a day. And so that gives us some ability to crosswalk here from weekly business revenue to average daily revenue, and then down to how many shifts we can support. And if this hospital maintains that many shifts and continues to do that average, then they will come in at 25% of labor, and that management team will have successfully mitigated the business loss by adjusting the staff costs appropriately. I think we can see that a little clearer when we look at these two charts. So on the left, we have the managed labor, and on the right, we have the unmanaged labor. And so the black line that you can see waving downward on each of those charts is the revenue. That doesn't change in either chart. That's what's been happening. The blue lines in each of the charts represent the labor. So on the managed labor on the left, you can see it's dipping down somewhat along with the changing revenue. However, on the unmanaged labor chart, which is on the right, it's just a straight line. So that's our beautiful, loving Labrador labor who's just chomping straight through each week, just consuming the same amount of labor despite the fact that the business is getting slower and slower and slower. And so what happens is the bar charts in the middle show the percentage of staff cost. And so on the managed labor side, it just stays at 25% because we're adjusting that labor down. However, what's happening on the unmanaged side, where maybe we're just focused on other things, we're caught up in our task work, we're not really paying attention, we're not communicating with our team, and we're just letting everybody come in and do the same thing while the business is eroding, that staff cost as a percentage jumps up as high as 39% by the 6th week there, which if you don't stop that, I guess there's a saying in veterinary medicine, well, probably in all medicine, which is that all bleeding stops eventually, right? So we don't know where this is going. I literally cannot tell you next week what is going to be different for this hospital because the data is not there. This is that live. And so we just have to keep our eye on it, and we're going to have to come up with some other solutions potentially. So who knows, but this is what's happening right now. And so you can see what happens if you just let that labor profile sit where it normally is versus if you try to make some healthy adjustments for it. So look, knowledge is power and delivery is everything. This is a time when you need to pause and think about what you're doing. When we start adjusting labor, staff costs, we're also adjusting the lives of our staff. Cutting hours, reducing hours, all have direct impact on the team. And so you want to go slow here. You want to pause and do some checks. You want to make sure that your data is good. You want to make sure that you're looking at it from the right perspective. Don't work in a bubble. Talk with your medical director and your other leaders and supervisors in the practice. Talk with your ROD and talk with your human resources partner, because depending on what you're looking at and how you decide you're going to manage this, one, you may just have an unhealthy perspective and you might be just kind of missing it. So you need to get that feedback. But two, if you're not and you're all in agreement on a plan, well, then you need to think about some communication plans. I think the worst thing that you can do is just show up one morning and tell everybody that they have no hours or lay somebody off. So you need to think about, one, how this plan is going to work. Is your labor problem something that you can manage by tweaking a department versus the whole hospital? Will you be better suited to reduce the hours across the board for everybody a little bit, like a general lowering of the tide? Or would it be smarter to do some layoffs and let there be a little bit of uncomfortableness for a few people, but then everybody else is just back to normal and they know it's done and the solution has been kind of put in place and everybody else can feel safe? There aren't good answers here. Remember what we talked about earlier. In the beginning, we want to pause and figure out, why has our business changed? In the case of a pandemic, there really isn't much that we can do except follow the rules and the guidance of the leaders around us and make the best decisions that we can and evolve in this evolving marketplace. But in the case of some of the other scenarios, maybe there are some things that we could have avoided even being in this situation had we tended to them a little bit better. So I don't want people to forget that, and that your responsibilities as the manager are to survey and evaluate and adjust. And part of that means being strategic, and part of that means keeping your eye on the trajectory of the hospital and putting things in place. Taking on some of the programs that are being brought to you by, in our case, a national support office that is doing everything they can to develop programs that will help us grow our practices. And we want to do that in a healthy way, right? And so as you figure this out and as you think about staff labor management, if you're watching this, you probably have some going on, so you're just looking for some info. I would just say, just be careful. Communicate as soon as it is reasonably safe to do so. If you're planning on doing layoffs or if you're planning on affecting everybody's hours, talk with your human resources partner and figure out how and when you can start talking about this, because it's been my experience the more lead time you can give to your people so that they can prepare, the better. Sometimes people will surface and they'll raise their hand and say, you know what, I have other options in my life. Don't take me out instead. I don't need the hours right now. Just take me off the schedule. So sometimes solutions will present themselves if you're able to work with your team ahead of time. And keep in mind that everything that we do is completely connected. When we are talking about making changes to our team, if we do that poorly, if we mishandle that, then we're going to do damage to our culture. And when we damage our culture, then those people that work for us feel insecure or frustrated. Their work performance is going to change. The way that they work with clients is going to change. The level of client experience and client management they provide is going to change. And now what you end up happening is that your clients are having a poor experience and they're going to vote with their feet. They're going to go someplace else. And when that happens, you're back into this cycle of your business contracting. And when your business is contracting, you're back into looking at cutting labor. And so it can be a very vicious cycle. And so my proposal to you would be, instead, make sure that everything you are doing is to respect your team. The more you do that, the more your culture is going to blossom. And when that happens, people like coming to work. They feel safe. They feel respected. They have the tools that they need. I'm thinking of Good to Great here. It's an amazing book you should check out for some management philosophy. But when that happens, they engage with their clients so much better. The patient care is so much higher. Team morale is incredible. Now the business is thriving because the clients are having a wonderful experience. And when that happens, the business is growing. And when the business is growing, then we're trying to figure out how to expand our team. We have the resources we need to provide more training for our team. We can hire the best. We can recruit, we can train, and we can retain. And so to me, a staff-centric approach to running a veterinary hospital is very important. This is a very tough workplace to be in, and so respect has to be at the center of it. So if you are contemplating and studying staff cuts and staff cost management, then just please keep running concurrent in that conversation in your head, the concept of just really respecting the team and trying to do this in a way that is as healthy as possible. And with that, I will tell you, I thank you for your time. I hope that you have enjoyed this. All of us at the VCA's Southern California Hospital Management Team are excited to bring these videos to you. We are really looking forward to growing our little network here, so please reach out. Again, my name is Craig. Here is my email address. You can hit me up directly, and stay safe out there, everybody. And please let us know if you have any ideas for topics that we should bring to you. Otherwise, I hope to see you out there real soon. Take care. Bye-bye.